There is someone in your life who makes you feel it. You cannot always explain what they do differently. You cannot always point to a specific thing they said or a particular technique they used or a deliberate strategy they deployed. But when you leave a conversation with them, something has shifted. Something has settled. The weight you carried in is somehow lighter. The confusion you arrived with has not necessarily been solved, but it has been held in a way that makes it feel more manageable. More real. More like something that belongs to you rather than something that is happening to you. You felt understood. Not just heard. Not just acknowledged. Not just politely attended to in the way that most conversations, even well-intentioned ones, manage to achieve. Understood. At the level that actually matters. At the level below the words you used and the story you told and the surface content of everything you shared. At the level of who you actually are and what this actually means to you and what it feels like to be you in this particular moment carrying this particular thing. And you probably spent less time talking in that conversation than you thought you would. You probably said less than you expected to say. Because something about the quality of their attention made you want to go deeper rather than wider. Made you want to find the real thing you were trying to say rather than the acceptable version of it. Made you feel safe enough to stop performing and start actually speaking. Now think about the conversations where you did not feel that. The ones where you talked and left feeling somehow more alone than when you arrived. Where the other person said all the right things, offered all the appropriate responses, checked all the boxes of what caring engagement is supposed to look like, and you still walked away with the distinct sense that nothing real had been exchanged. That the conversation had happened on the surface and never touched what was actually there. The difference between these two experiences is not about how much was said. It is about something far more fundamental. Something that operates beneath the level of words and techniques and conscious strategies. Something that the most genuinely connecting people do naturally, often without any deliberate awareness of what they are doing, and that most people never learn to do at all. By the time you finish this audiobook, you will know exactly what that something is. You will understand it at the deepest levels of psychology, neuroscience, and human evolutionary biology. You will have a complete, practical framework for developing it, and you will never experience a conversation in quite the same way again. Because making people feel deeply understood without saying much is not a social skill. It is an art. A practice, a way of being with other people that is available to anyone willing to genuinely develop it. And it changes everything. Introduction. Let us be precise about what we are actually promising here. Making people feel deeply understood without saying much does not mean becoming silent. It does not mean withholding your own perspective or pretending you have no reactions or performing a kind of passive receptivity that is itself a form of dishonesty. It means developing the specific capacity to make understanding the primary orientation of your presence in a conversation. To make the inner world of the other person the genuine object of your attention in a way that they can feel. Not as a technique, not as a strategy, as a genuine quality of how you show up. This capacity is rare, and its rarity is not because it is extraordinarily difficult to develop. It is because it requires something that most people have never been specifically taught. And because it requires a fundamental reorientation away from the conversational habits that most of us have spent a lifetime developing. Most of our conversational habits are organized around expression, around getting our own perspective across, around managing how we are perceived, around finding the right response, the right advice, the right thing to say that will demonstrate our intelligence, our care, our adequacy as a conversational partner. The capacity we are developing in this audiobook is organized around something entirely different. Reception. The genuine, skilled, practiced art of receiving another person's experience so completely and so accurately that they feel, in the presence of your attention, more understood than they have been able to make themselves feel through the act of speaking. This is not a passive capacity. It is one of the most cognitively and emotionally demanding things a human being can do. It requires the simultaneous management of your own reactions, the genuine suspension of your own agenda, the disciplined focus of attention on the specific texture of another person's inner world, and the precise expression of understanding that makes the felt sense of being understood available to them. It is the most important conversational skill that almost nobody specifically develops. And this audiobook is your complete guide to developing it. We are going to cover the psychology of feeling understood, why it matters so profoundly, what it actually requires to produce, and what prevents most people from providing it despite their genuine desire to. We are going to explore the specific practices, the precise attentional skills, the particular qualities of presence and language that generate the felt sense of being understood. We are going to look at how this capacity applies across different relationship types and different conversational contexts. And we are going to give you a complete, practical system for developing it in your own life, beginning today. By the end, you will not just understand what makes people feel deeply understood. You will be someone who reliably, genuinely, and without much effort, provides that experience to everyone who matters to you. Part 1. The Psychology of Feeling Understood. Chapter 1. Why feeling understood is the deepest human need. Before we explore how to make people feel understood, we need to understand why it matters as profoundly as it does. Because if it were simply a pleasant social experience, a nicety that makes interactions more comfortable, understanding its mechanics would be useful but not urgent. The kind of thing you might improve on if you had the time and inclination, but that would not fundamentally change the quality of your relationships if you did not. But the felt sense of being understood is not a nicety. At the most fundamental level of human psychology and human evolutionary biology, it is a survival need. This is not hyperbole. This is the conclusion of decades of research in attachment theory, developmental psychology, social neuroscience, and the study of human well-being. Let us trace why this is true. Human beings are born into the world more helpless, more dependent, and more neurologically immature than the young of any other species. A human infant cannot walk, cannot feed itself, cannot regulate its own temperature, cannot manage even its own alertness and arousal. It is utterly, completely dependent on the care of other human beings for every aspect of its physical survival. But more than physical survival is at stake. The developing human brain is not born complete. It continues developing, dramatically, for the first 25 years of life. And the quality of its development, the specific neural architecture it builds, the capacity for emotion regulation, for empathy, for complex thought, for the management of stress and uncertainty and social complexity, is determined not just by genetics but by the quality of the relational environment in which it develops. Specifically, it is determined by the quality of attunement it receives from its caregivers. Attunement is the technical term for what the best caregivers do when they are at their best. It is the capacity to accurately read and respond to the inner state of the child. To know, from the quality of the cry, the tension in the body, the expression on the face, what the child is experiencing and what they need. And to respond in a way that communicates, I see what you are experiencing. I am here with you in it. You are not alone. When a child receives consistent, accurate attunement from their caregivers, something specific and permanent happens in their developing brain. The neural circuits responsible for emotion regulation, for the capacity to manage distress, for the experience of security in the face of uncertainty, are built with a robustness and a reliability that will serve them for the rest of their life. When a child does not receive consistent, accurate attunement, those circuits develop with less robustness. The child has more difficulty managing distress, has less capacity for the self-regulation that allows for clear thinking under pressure, has a more limited sense of security in relationships, is more likely to experience the world as fundamentally unpredictable and potentially threatening. This research, pioneered by developmental psychologist John Bowlby and extensively developed by Mary Ainsworth, Mary Main, and Alan Shroff among many others, demonstrates something profound about the relationship between being understood and human well-being. Being understood is not just a pleasant experience. It is the foundational relational experience that builds the neurological infrastructure for psychological health. And what is true in infancy remains true across the lifespan. Because the developing brain is not finished at childhood, it continues to need, and to be shaped by, the experience of genuine attunement throughout adult life. The adult who feels consistently understood in their closest relationships shows measurably better physiological health, higher immune function, greater resilience in the face of stress, lower rates of depression and anxiety, and greater longevity than the adult who does not. This is not because feeling understood is a proxy for some other variable that is producing the health benefits. The experience of feeling understood is itself the active ingredient. The felt sense of being genuinely received by another person activates specific neurological and physiological systems that directly support health and well-being. Research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA has shown that social connection and the experience of being understood activate the same brain reward systems as physical pleasures like food and warmth. That social pain, including the pain of not being understood, is processed by the same brain regions as physical pain. That the experience of genuine relational attunement produces neurochemical changes, increases in oxytocin, reductions in cortisol, that directly counteract the physiological effects of stress. In other words, being understood is literally good for you. Physiologically, measurably, in ways that compound over time. And not being understood, particularly in your closest relationships, is literally harmful. In the same measurable, physiological, compounding way. This gives the capacity we are developing in this audiobook a weight and an urgency that extends beyond social nicety into the domain of something genuinely important. Making the people you love feel deeply understood is not just a kindness. It is one of the most health-promoting things you can do for them. And developing the capacity to provide it is one of the most important investments you can make in the quality of every relationship in your life. Now let us look at what, specifically, produces the felt sense of being understood. Because understanding what it is, at the level of actual psychological and neurological experience, is the foundation of being able to provide it deliberately. The felt sense of being understood is not a single experience. It is a cluster of related experiences that arise together when attunement is genuine and accurate. The first component is the experience of being accurately seen. Of having your inner state, not just the words you used to describe it, but the actual texture of the experience itself, accurately reflected back. Of encountering, in the response of the other person, evidence that they have genuinely registered something true about what you are experiencing. The second component is the experience of mattering. Of being someone whose inner world is worth genuine attention. Of having your experience treated as significant rather than trivial, complicated rather than simple, worthy of genuine engagement rather than efficient acknowledgement. The third component is the experience of not being alone. Of having the weight of your experience held in the presence of another person in a way that makes it feel more manageable. Not solved, not resolved, not made to go away, but held, in the specific way that shared experience is held, which makes it lighter than it was when it was carried alone. The fourth component is the experience of being accepted. Of having disclosed something about your inner world and found, in the response, not judgment or correction or the subtle communications of discomfort that so often accompany vulnerability, but genuine welcome. The experience of being all of this and still being received with care. These four components together constitute the full felt sense of being deeply understood. And each of them is produced not primarily by what is said but by the quality of attention that precedes and surrounds what is said. Which is why the art of making people feel understood without saying much is exactly the right framing. Because it is the quality of attention, more than the content of response, that does the work. Chapter 2. The Attention Economy of Conversation, Why Most People Never Feel Heard. There is a crisis in the quality of human attention. And it is not the crisis that most people are talking about. The commonly discussed crisis is the one produced by technology. By smartphones and social media and the infinite scroll of content designed to capture and hold attention with maximum efficiency. By the progressive fragmentation of our capacity for sustained focus that results from living in an environment where attention is the primary commercial commodity. This crisis is real, and it has genuine consequences for the quality of human connection. The partial presence that technology produces, the constant background monitoring of notifications and updates, and the possibility of something more interesting available elsewhere, is a genuine obstacle to the quality of attention that making people feel understood requires. But there is an older and more fundamental crisis in conversational attention that precedes technology by millennia, and that is in many ways more difficult to address. It is the crisis of the internally divided listener. When most people listen to someone speak, they are not primarily attending to the speaker's inner world. They are attending to several other things simultaneously, and the speaker's inner world is only one of them, and often not the most prominent one. They are attending to their own reactions, to the thoughts and feelings and associations and memories that what the speaker is saying activates in them. These internal responses are often more vivid and more emotionally compelling than the speaker's actual words. They are attending to their response preparation, to the construction of what they will say when the speaker finishes, to the specific words, the appropriate tone, the right balance of validation and insight and practical wisdom that will constitute an adequate response. This response preparation begins almost immediately, often within the first few sentences of what the speaker is sharing, and consumes significant cognitive bandwidth. They are attending to social monitoring, to the management of their own performance as a listener, to whether they are making the right amount of eye contact, expressing the right amount of emotional response, giving the appropriate signals of engagement, to whether they are coming across as caring and intelligent and adequate to the conversational moment. They are attending to evaluation, to the assessment of whether what the speaker is saying is accurate, reasonable, and valid, to whether they agree or disagree, to where the speaker's reasoning is flawed or their conclusion is premature or their emotional response is disproportionate to the facts. And they are attending to the speaker, but only partially, only with the fraction of attention that remains after all of these other simultaneous processes have claimed their share. The speaker feels this partial attention, not always consciously, but at the level of the nervous system, which is exquisitely sensitive to the quality of attunement it is receiving. They feel the difference between the listener who is genuinely, primarily present with their experience and the listener who is attending to many things of which their experience is only one. And the felt sense of being understood is not available in the presence of partial attention. It requires the specific quality of full attention, the undivided orientation of another person's genuine interest toward your inner world. This is what is genuinely rare. And this is what makes the people who can provide it so profoundly valuable in the lives of everyone around them. Let us look more specifically at each of the obstacles to the quality of attention that understanding requires. Obstacle 1. The autobiographical response. The autobiographical response is what happens when something the speaker shares activates a comparable experience in the listener's own history, and the listener's attention immediately shifts from the speaker's experience to their own. This is the single most common obstacle to genuine listening, and it is the one that is most often disguised as connection. When someone tells you about their grief and you immediately think of your own grief, when they describe their fear and you immediately recall your own comparable fear, when they share their frustration and you instantly access a parallel frustration from your own life, the feeling of this internal activation is one of recognition, of empathy, of the sense that you genuinely understand because you have experienced something similar. But genuine understanding is not the same as parallel experience. Understanding another person's experience of grief does not come from accessing your own grief. It comes from genuinely inhabiting the specific texture of their grief, which is not the same as yours, which has its own specific quality, its own specific contours, its own particular features that are as unique as the person experiencing it. When the listener's attention shifts to their own parallel experience, they lose access to the specificity of the speaker's. They stop receiving the unique texture of what is being shared and start fitting it into the template of their own comparable experience, which produces a response that feels, to them, like genuine empathy, and that lands, on the speaker, as the particular disappointment of having shared something specific and received something general. The skilled listener learns to notice when the autobiographical response is activated, and to deliberately redirect attention back to the specificity of the speaker's experience before responding. To ask the questions that reveal more of that specificity rather than offering the comparable story that would demonstrate their own parallel experience. Obstacle 2. The evaluation habit. Most people, when they listen, are simultaneously evaluating, assessing the accuracy of what is being said, the reasonableness of the emotional response, the validity of the conclusion being drawn, the appropriateness of the interpretation being offered. This evaluative habit is not malicious. It comes from a genuine desire to be helpful, from the conviction that the most useful thing you can offer someone who is struggling is accurate information, corrected misperceptions, and more realistic interpretations of their situation. But evaluation is the enemy of understanding. Because evaluation is fundamentally oriented toward the listener's assessment of the speaker's experience rather than toward the speaker's experience itself. When you are evaluating what someone is sharing, you are placing your own judgment between yourself and their inner world. And that judgment, however benevolent, prevents the direct reception of their experience that genuine understanding requires. The speaker can feel when they are being evaluated. They feel it in the slight shift in the listener's expression when they say something the listener does not agree with, in the quality of attention that changes from receiving to assessing, in the response that comes back as correction or reframing rather than genuine engagement with what they actually said. And they typically respond by narrowing the conversation, by backing away from the more vulnerable or more complex dimensions of what they were sharing, by gravitating toward the safer, more defensible parts of their experience that are less likely to attract evaluative response. The skilled listener learns to suspend evaluation not permanently but for long enough to genuinely receive what is being shared before forming any assessment of it. To treat the speaker's experience as the primary subject of interest rather than as a proposition to be evaluated. Obstacle 3. The solution imperative. When someone shares a problem, a difficulty, a struggle, the most powerful impulse in most listeners is the immediate move toward solutions, toward the identification of what can be done, toward the practical wisdom that might resolve the difficulty and restore the equilibrium that the problem has disturbed. This impulse comes from genuine care, from the authentic desire to help, from the discomfort of witnessing someone else's suffering when you believe you have the capacity to reduce it. But the solution imperative, when it is acted on too quickly, produces the experience that many people describe as one of the most disappointing in intimate conversation. The experience of sharing something difficult and receiving, in response, a list of things to do about it. Of having the full complexity of what you are experiencing reduced to a problem that the other person has now efficiently solved on your behalf. This experience is disappointing not because the solutions are wrong. Often they are right, but because the offering of solutions signals something specific about where the listener's attention was during the sharing. It signals that the listener was attending primarily to the problem rather than to the person experiencing the problem. That their internal process during the sharing was not "I want to understand what this is like for you," but "what can be done about this." These are fundamentally different orientations, and the speaker can feel the difference. The skilled listener learns to sit with the discomfort of not immediately solving, to resist the pull toward the practical until the experiential has been genuinely received, to trust that the most helpful thing they can offer is not a solution but a genuine, sustained, curious presence with the experience as the speaker is living it. Obstacle 4. The reassurance reflex. When someone shares something painful, the most natural and most socially conditioned response is reassurance. It will be okay. Things will work out. You are stronger than you think. It is not as bad as it seems. Reassurance is offered with genuine love, and it is sometimes genuinely helpful. Sometimes the most important thing is to feel that the person who cares about you believes things will be alright. But the reassurance reflex, when it is automatic and when it arrives too quickly, has a specific effect on the speaker that is the opposite of understanding. It suggests that the experience the speaker is having is not quite accurate. That their distress is slightly exaggerated. That if they could see things more clearly, as the reassuring person apparently can, the situation would not be as difficult as they are experiencing it to be. This is the specific disappointment of the reassurance reflex. Not that the reassurance is wrong, but that it arrives before the experience has been genuinely received. Before the speaker has had the experience of having the full weight of what they are carrying seen and acknowledged as real. Reassurance offered after genuine reception lands entirely differently. After someone has genuinely sat with your experience, genuinely acknowledged the weight of it, genuinely demonstrated that they have received the full complexity of what you are carrying, the same reassurance that would otherwise feel dismissive can feel like genuine hope offered from a position of genuine understanding. The sequence matters more than the content. The skilled listener learns to receive first and reassure later. To resist the impulse to immediately minimize the difficulty in favor of first genuinely inhabiting its full weight with the speaker. Obstacle 5. The performance of listening. Perhaps the most pervasive and the most damaging obstacle to genuine understanding is the performance of listening. The skilled enactment of the behaviors that signal listening, the eye contact, the nodding, the appropriate verbal acknowledgments, the carefully timed expressions of empathy, without the actual internal orientation of genuine attention. Most people are considerably more skilled at performing listening than at actually doing it. Because the performance of listening is a social skill that has been explicitly and implicitly taught. There are specific behavioral cues that communicate attentiveness. And most people have learned them. But the performance and the reality are not the same. And the speaker's nervous system can feel the difference. What the performance of listening feels like, from the outside, is being technically attended to while actually being alone. Of receiving all the right behavioral signals while somehow sensing that genuine contact has not been made. That the person across from you is going through the motions of care without the actual orientation of their genuine interest toward your experience. This is one of the loneliest experiences in human relationship, because it combines the form of connection with the absence of its substance. It creates the social appearance of being understood while withholding the actual felt sense of it. The skilled listener learns the difference between performing listening and actually doing it. And learns to choose the latter even when it is more demanding. Even when it requires the genuine suspension of their own competing internal processes. Even when genuine attention is harder than the performance of it. Chapter 3. The Neuroscience of Feeling Understood. What happens in the brain? To understand how to make people feel deeply understood, we need to go inside the brain and examine what actually happens when genuine understanding is received. Because the felt sense of being understood is not just a subjective experience. It is a specific neurological event. A cascade of physiological and chemical changes that occur in the brain and body of the person who is being genuinely received. Understanding these changes gives us a precise map of what we are trying to produce. And understanding what produces them gives us a precise map of how to produce them. Let us start with the most fundamental neurological fact about the social brain. The human brain is designed to be in relationship. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a structural reality. The neural systems that support the most sophisticated human cognition, the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, the insula, the default mode network, are all profoundly social in their operation. They are built for and function most optimally in the context of genuine relational engagement. This means that the quality of a person's social experience directly affects the quality of their cognitive functioning. People think more clearly, make better decisions, process difficult emotions more effectively, and access their most sophisticated cognitive resources when they are in the presence of someone who is genuinely attuned to them. Research by neuroscientist Louis Cozzolino has shown that the brain is fundamentally a social organ, shaped by relationships across the lifespan, and continuing to require the specific input of genuine relational attunement to function at its best throughout adulthood. When you make someone feel deeply understood, you are not just providing a pleasant relational experience. You are creating the specific neurological conditions under which they can access their own most sophisticated resources. Under which they can think most clearly, feel most accurately, and navigate whatever difficulty they brought to the conversation with maximum capability. Now let us look at the specific neurological events that the felt sense of being understood produces. The oxytocin response. When genuine attunement is experienced, the brain releases oxytocin. This neuropeptide, often called the bonding hormone or the trust hormone, has specific and profound effects on the experience of the conversation and on the relationship between the two people having it. Oxytocin reduces the activation of the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. This reduction in amygdala activation has a direct effect on the speaker's experience. They feel safer, less defensive, more open to the full complexity of their own experience, more willing to access and express the dimensions of what they are carrying that feel most vulnerable. In practical terms, this means that the speaker, when they feel genuinely understood, goes deeper. They stop protecting the conversation and start genuinely inhabiting it. They say the real thing rather than the acceptable version of it. They access the level of their experience that they may not even have been consciously aware of before the conversation began. This is one of the most important things to understand about the dynamic of understanding-centered conversation. The person who feels understood does not just feel better. They actually understand themselves better. The quality of attention they receive helps them access dimensions of their own experience that are not available without it. Oxytocin also increases the speaker's sense of connection to the listener. It activates the social bonding circuitry in ways that create genuine feelings of trust, closeness, and positive regard. The person who makes you feel understood does not just receive gratitude. They become, in the neurological reality of your experience, someone safe. Someone worth investing in. Someone whose presence in your life becomes more valued with each genuine encounter. The cortisol reduction. When a person is carrying difficulty, stress, or pain, their cortisol levels are elevated. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, has specific effects on the brain and body. It directs cognitive resources toward threat processing and away from higher-level functions. It activates defensive responses. It narrows attention to the most immediate and most threatening aspects of the situation. In the presence of genuine attunement, cortisol levels measurably decrease. The nervous system registers the presence of a safe, attuned other and begins to down-regulate the stress response. This physiological change has direct experiential consequences for the speaker. The difficulty they are carrying begins to feel more manageable. Not because it has changed, but because the neurological context in which they are experiencing it has changed. Because the stress response that was amplifying every aspect of the difficulty has been partially quieted by the experience of genuine relational safety. This is why people so often say, after a conversation with someone who genuinely understood them, that they feel lighter. Or that the problem feels less overwhelming. Or that they are not sure exactly what changed but something did. What changed was their neurological state. And it changed because of the specific quality of attention they received. The default mode network activation. The default mode network is a set of interconnected brain regions that become active during self-reflection, perspective-taking, and the processing of narrative and meaning. It is the neural system most directly involved in making sense of experience. Research by social neuroscientist Diana Tomier and others has shown that when people feel understood, when they experience accurate reflection of their inner state, the default mode network activates in specific ways that support deeper self-understanding and more coherent narrative construction. In practical terms, this means that the person who feels understood, in the presence of that felt sense, becomes better at understanding themselves. Better at identifying what they are actually feeling beneath the surface expression. Better at constructing coherent meaning out of complex experience. Better at integrating what they are going through into a larger narrative of their life that makes it feel less overwhelming and more comprehensible. The felt sense of being understood is, at the neurological level, an aid to self-understanding. The person who receives genuine attunement does not just feel better. They think more clearly about their own experience. They access insights about themselves that the absence of attunement would have kept out of reach. This is one of the most profound implications of the neurological research for the practice of understanding-centered conversation. When you make someone feel deeply understood, you are not just giving them the experience of being received. You are giving them access to themselves, to dimensions of their own experience and their own wisdom that are not fully available without the specific catalyst of genuine relational attunement. The mirror dynamic, of having your inner state accurately reflected by another person, activates the brain's self-reflection systems in ways that produce genuine self-knowledge. The person who feels understood often leaves the conversation knowing themselves better than they did when they arrived. Having accessed, in the presence of genuine attunement, insights that their own internal process had been unable to reach. This is the deepest gift that understanding-centered conversation offers. Not just the experience of being received, but the access to self that genuine reception makes possible. Part 2. The Practices of Understanding-Centered Conversation. Chapter 4. Presence Before Technique, the Foundation of Everything. Everything that follows in this audiobook, every specific practice, every precise attentional skill, every particular quality of language that generates the felt sense of being understood, rests on a single foundation. Presence. Not presence in the vague, general sense of being physically available. Presence in the specific, demanding sense of genuine full contact attention. Of being so completely oriented toward the inner world of the other person that your own internal processes are not competing for your awareness. This is the rarest and the most important conversational quality that exists. And it cannot be faked. This is the most important thing to understand about the art of making people feel understood. The specific practices, the techniques, the precise language, all of these are genuinely useful. But they are useful only insofar as they express and support a genuine internal orientation of presence. Applied in the absence of that genuine orientation, they are the performance of understanding rather than its reality. And the performance, however skilled, is what produces the lonely experience of being technically attended to while actually being alone. So before we explore any of the specific practices, we need to spend significant time on the foundation. On what genuine presence actually is, what it requires, what prevents it, and how it is developed. What genuine presence is. Genuine presence in conversation is the state in which your primary attention is genuinely, fully oriented toward the inner world of the person you are with. In which the contents of your own mind, your reactions, your judgments, your response preparations, your internal monologue, are not competing with the speaker's experience for your awareness but are genuinely subordinated to the reception of it. This is not a passive state. It is one of the most actively demanding cognitive and emotional states available to a human being. Because it requires the continuous, disciplined management of the internal processes that constantly want to pull attention back to their own territory. The reactions that want to be processed. The judgments that want to be formed. The responses that want to be prepared. Genuine presence is the ongoing practice of noticing when these internal processes are claiming attention and redirecting attention back to the speaker's experience. It is not the elimination of your own internal life during the conversation. That is impossible and would not be desirable even if it were possible. Your own reactions, your own emotional responses to what the speaker is sharing, are actually important information. They tell you something about what the speaker is communicating at levels below explicit content. But in the state of genuine presence, your internal responses are in service of understanding rather than in competition with it. They are attended to briefly, as information, and then released back into the background while the primary orientation remains with the speaker's experience. What genuine presence requires? Genuine presence requires several specific capacities that most people have not specifically developed. The first is attentional flexibility. The ability to hold your attention on the speaker's experience even when something in that experience activates a strong internal response in you. To notice the activation, to register it as information, and to bring your attention back to the speaker rather than following the activation into your own internal territory. This is a trainable capacity. It is, in fact, precisely the capacity that mindfulness practice develops. Not the specific practice of meditation, though that is one useful path to it. The more general practice of noticing where your attention is and deliberately redirecting it when it has wandered from where you intend it to be. The second is emotional tolerance. The capacity to be present with another person's difficult experience without the discomfort of witnessing it pulling you away from it. Many people find it genuinely difficult to sit with others' pain, confusion, anger, or grief without the strong impulse to resolve, redirect, or reassure. This impulse, as we explored in the previous chapter, is the primary engine of premature solution offering and the reassurance reflex. Genuine presence requires the development of sufficient emotional tolerance that you can remain oriented toward the speaker's experience even when it is uncomfortable to witness. Even when your own discomfort with their difficulty is significant. Even when every instinct is pulling you toward the action that would make the discomfort stop. The third is ego suspension. The temporary setting aside of your own need to be perceived in a particular way. To be seen as helpful, intelligent, adequate, caring. The suspension of the social performance that most people are simultaneously conducting in their closest relationships, the monitoring of their own impression, the management of how they are coming across. This ego suspension is perhaps the most difficult of the three. Because the social monitoring is so deeply ingrained and so reflexively automatic that most people are not even aware they are doing it. It feels like part of their experience rather than a process they are engaged in. But it is the suspension of this process, even partially, that creates the specific quality of attention that the speaker can feel is genuinely other-directed rather than self-managed. How genuine presence is developed. Genuine presence is not a state that most people inhabit naturally and consistently. It is a capacity that is developed through specific practices. The primary practice is simple but genuinely demanding. It is the practice of noticing when your attention has left the speaker and returning it, without self-judgment, to their experience. This practice is most easily developed in low-stakes contexts. In conversations where your own reactions are mild enough that the pull of attention back into your own territory is relatively gentle. Where you can practice the noticing and redirecting without the full force of the emotional activation that high-stakes conversations produce. As the capacity develops in low-stakes contexts, it becomes more available in high-stakes ones. Not perfectly. The most charged conversations will always be the hardest ones in which to maintain the quality of presence that genuine understanding requires. But the practice in ordinary contexts builds the attentional muscle that makes the quality of presence more available when it is most needed. A specific practice that accelerates the development of genuine presence is what we might call the inner state check. Before entering a conversation that matters, particularly one in which someone is going to share something difficult, you deliberately attend to your own internal state. You notice what you are carrying. What concerns, what preoccupations, what emotional residue from earlier in the day or week that might be competing for your attention during the conversation. You do not resolve these things. You simply acknowledge them. You say to yourself, consciously, I am carrying these things right now. And I am setting them in the background for the duration of this conversation so that I can be genuinely present with this person. This brief, deliberate acknowledgement of your own state before entering the conversation reduces its pull on your attention during the conversation. Because what has been consciously acknowledged needs less unconscious processing than what has not. Another practice is what we might call the quality of attention audit. After significant conversations, you reflect on where your attention actually was during the exchange. Not where you intended it to be. Where it actually was. How much of your processing was genuinely oriented toward the speaker's experience and how much was occupied by your own reactions, evaluations, response preparations, and social monitoring. This audit, practiced honestly and without self-judgment, reveals the specific patterns of attentional drift that are most characteristic of your own listening. And knowing your patterns is the prerequisite for developing the capacity to interrupt them. Chapter 5. The Art of Attuned Listening, Hearing What Is Beneath the Words. Attuned listening is the specific quality of listening that produces the felt sense of being deeply understood. It is different from ordinary listening in a fundamental way. Ordinary listening is oriented toward the content of what is being said. Toward the explicit information, the facts, the events, the logical structure of the narrative. It processes the words and constructs from them a cognitive representation of what the speaker is sharing. Attuned listening is oriented toward the experience beneath the content, toward what the speaker is actually feeling, what they most need the listener to understand, what the words are approximating but not entirely capturing. It processes not just the words but the tone, the pace, the body language, the things that are said and the things that are conspicuously not said, the emotional signature of the sharing rather than just its informational content. This distinction matters because the felt sense of being understood is produced not by having your words accurately received but by having your experience accurately received. People do not feel understood when someone gives a precise paraphrase of what they said. They feel understood when someone demonstrates that they have registered what it was like to be them having the experience they were describing. These are very different things. Let us look at how attuned listening actually works. What specific attentional skills it involves and how they are developed. Attuned listening skill 1. Listening for the emotional signature. Every piece of communication has two layers. The content layer, what is being said, and the emotional layer, what is being felt. Most listeners attend primarily to the content layer and receive the emotional layer only incidentally, as a background impression that colors their overall response. Attuned listening inverts this priority. It treats the emotional layer as primary and the content layer as the vehicle through which the emotional layer is being communicated. This means attending specifically to the quality of the speaker's voice. The places where it slows down, speeds up, tightens, softens, breaks slightly, recovers. These vocal variations are not random. They mark the specific dimensions of the experience that carry the most emotional weight. The places where the speaker is most genuinely in contact with what they are sharing rather than narrating it from a safer distance. It means attending to the body, to the micro-expressions that cross the face, to the changes in posture and breathing and the specific tension that appears in certain parts of the body in response to certain moments in the sharing. These somatic signals are often more accurate indicators of the speaker's actual inner state than the words they are using, which are subject to the various social editing processes that shape verbal expression. It means attending to the pace and rhythm of the sharing, to the places where the speaker lingers and the places where they rush. The lingering marks the territory that carries the most significance. The rushing often marks the territory that feels most vulnerable or most difficult to access. And the rhythm of the sharing, the natural flow of it versus the places where it halts or stutters, reveals the landscape of ease and difficulty within the experience. The practical development of this skill begins with the deliberate attention to these nonverbal signals during conversations. Not as an analysis project, as an extension of genuine curiosity about the speaker's actual experience. What is the emotional quality beneath the words? What is the body communicating that the words are not fully capturing? Where is the most significant territory hiding beneath the narrative structure of what is being shared? Attuned listening skill 2. Tracking the needs beneath the story. Every person who shares a difficult experience with you has, beneath the story they are telling, a set of specific needs from the conversation. Specific things they most need the conversation to provide in order to feel genuinely received. These needs vary across individuals and across conversations. Some of the most common ones include the need to be validated, to have the legitimacy of their experience confirmed, to hear, from someone whose judgment they trust, that what they are feeling makes sense given what they are experiencing. The need to be witnessed, to simply have another person know what they are going through, not to have it solved or improved or contextualized, but to have someone else know that it is real and that it is hard. The need to be helped to make sense of the experience, to use the conversation as a processing space in which the confusion of a complex experience can be organized into something more coherent and more manageable. The need to feel less alone, to have the isolated quality of a difficult experience dissolved by the genuine presence of another person who is genuinely with them in it. The need for perspective, to have the experience placed in a larger context that makes it feel less overwhelming or less final. Attuned listeners develop the skill of tracking which of these needs is most prominent in any given moment of the sharing, and of providing, from the available responses, the one that most accurately matches the specific need rather than the one that feels most natural or most comfortable for the listener. This tracking is not an intellectual analysis project. It is a quality of continuous attunement to the shifting landscape of the speaker's experience. A felt sense of what is needed right now that is developed through genuine presence rather than cognitive strategy. But it can be made more explicit as a developmental practice. After conversations, you can reflect on what the specific needs seem to be and whether your response addressed it. You can notice the patterns in your own responses, what you tend to offer most readily, and whether that offering matches what is most frequently needed by the people you care about. Attuned listening skill 3. Attending to what is not said. Some of the most important things about a person's experience are the things they do not say. The dimension of the experience they approach and then retreat from. The feeling that they name and then immediately qualify. The interpretation they offer and then undercut. The part of the story that seems important but that they skip past without quite landing on. These omissions are not random. They mark the territory that is most difficult to access, most vulnerable, most subject to the social editing that prevents full expression. And they are often the territory that contains the most significant material. Attuned listeners develop sensitivity to these omissions. They notice when the speaker has approached territory and then backed away from it. They notice the conspicuous absences in the narrative, the places where you would expect more to be said and something stops the speaker from saying it. And they create space for those omissions to be filled, not by pointing them out in a way that might feel intrusive or presumptuous, but by staying in the territory that surrounds them, by asking questions that circle the avoided dimension without requiring an immediate direct approach to it, by communicating, through the quality of their continued, patient, genuinely curious attention, that this territory is safe to enter if and when the speaker is ready. The specific language for this is gentle and open. You started to say something there and then moved on. If you want to come back to it, I'm curious about that part. Or simply staying with the general territory longer than feels necessary, with questions that invite more depth without demanding it. The speaker who experiences this quality of attuned attention often finds themselves saying things they did not know they were going to say, accessing dimensions of their experience that they had not been consciously aware of before the conversation began, moving, guided by the quality of the listener's attention, into the territory that most needed to be explored. This is the specific magic of attuned listening. It does not just receive what is already available. It creates the conditions under which more becomes available, under which the speaker accesses themselves more fully in the presence of genuine reception than they are able to do alone. Attuned listening skill 4. The internal signal processing. Your own internal responses during a conversation are not distractions from attuned listening. They are important information. When something the speaker says activates a strong reaction in you, that activation is a signal. It tells you something about the emotional weight of what they shared, about the specific dimension of their experience that is most charged, about the feeling tone beneath the words. The attuned listener learns to use their own internal signals as a guide to the speaker's experience rather than as an invitation to attend to their own. To notice, I am feeling something in response to what they just said. What does that tell me about what they are experiencing? And then to bring that information back to the speaker through the quality of their continued attention and the specific responses they offer. This is what therapists and counselors mean when they talk about using themselves as an instrument. Not in the sense of sharing their own experience in response. In the sense of using their own emotional resonance with the speaker's material as a source of information about the speaker's inner world. The attuned listener who notices that they feel a wave of sadness when the speaker describes a particular moment is picking up something real about the emotional weight of that moment. The attuned listener who notices a flicker of anger when the speaker describes being dismissed is registering something real about the injustice that the speaker may not have named directly. These internal signals, attended to briefly and used as information rather than followed into personal response, are one of the most powerful tools available for the precise tracking of another person's emotional experience. Chapter 6. The Language of Understanding: What to Say and How to Say It. We have established that making people feel deeply understood is primarily a function of the quality of attention rather than the content of response. But the content of response does matter. The specific language of understanding, what you say when you do speak, how you reflect what you have received, the particular words and phrases and questions that communicate genuine reception rather than performance of it, has real and significant impact on whether the felt sense of being understood is produced. Let us explore the specific language of understanding in detail. The language of accurate reflection. The single most powerful linguistic tool for making someone feel understood is accurate reflection. The precise, specific mirroring back of what they have shared in language that demonstrates you have received not just the content but the experience. Most people, when they attempt to reflect what they have heard, do so at the level of content. They paraphrase the facts, the events, the narrative structure of what was shared. And this content-level reflection, while sometimes useful, rarely produces the felt sense of being deeply understood. The reflection that produces that felt sense is the reflection that captures the emotional texture of the experience. Not just what happened but what it was like. Not just what they said but what it seemed to mean to them. Not just the facts of the situation but the specific quality of their experience of the situation. The difference in language looks like this. Content-level reflection. So it sounds like you had a really difficult week at work and you're feeling overwhelmed. Experience-level reflection. It sounds like there's been this constant pressure building, like you haven't had a moment to breathe, and maybe underneath the exhaustion there's also something that feels almost like disappointment in yourself for not handling it all better than you feel you have. The second reflection does something specific. It reaches beneath the explicit content of what was shared and attempts to name something about the inner experience that may not have been fully articulated. The disappointment beneath the exhaustion. The self-judgment beneath the overwhelm. When this kind of reflection is accurate, when it names something real that the speaker has been experiencing but has not quite managed to put into words, the effect is often striking. The speaker goes still for a moment. Their face changes, and they say something like, "Yes, exactly. That's exactly it." That response, that sense of having been seen at the level that actually matters, is the felt sense of deep understanding being produced in real time. Of course, this kind of reflection can also miss. Can name something that is not quite right, that does not accurately capture what the speaker is experiencing. And when it misses, the speaker will say so, or their body will signal it, and the attuned listener receives the correction and tries again, with a quality of openness and continued curiosity that communicates, "I want to get this right. Keep helping me understand." The willingness to miss and to remain curious is itself a powerful communicator of genuine understanding orientation. Because it signals that you are genuinely trying to receive the specific reality of their experience rather than offering a generic approximation of what someone in their situation might feel. The questions that open rather than direct. The questions that make people feel understood are not the questions that direct the conversation toward the territory the listener wants to explore. They are the questions that open the space for the speaker to go deeper into the territory they are already in. There is a specific quality of question that does this. It is open enough to allow the speaker to take it in any direction that is true for them. It is grounded enough in what has already been shared that it communicates genuine attention rather than generic curiosity. And it is oriented toward the experiential rather than the factual. These questions sound like, what was that like for you? And how did you make sense of that? What do you think was hardest about that? When you say specific word they used, what does that mean to you? What does that feel like from the inside? And underneath all of that, what is it that you most need right now? Notice what these questions have in common. They are all oriented toward the speaker's inner experience rather than toward the external facts of the situation. They invite depth rather than breadth. They communicate that the listener is genuinely interested in the quality of the speaker's experience, in what it is actually like to be them in this situation, rather than in the narrative facts of what happened. This orientation toward experience is the specific quality of questioning that produces the felt sense of being understood rather than merely attended to. There is also a specific category of question that is particularly powerful in understanding-centered conversation. It is the question that names something the speaker has been circling without quite landing on and offers it tentatively as a possibility. I'm wondering if part of what's difficult about this is something like tentative formulation of what seems to be beneath the surface. Does that resonate? This kind of question does two things simultaneously. It demonstrates that the listener has been attentive enough to notice what is beneath the surface. And it offers the tentative formulation as a possibility rather than a conclusion, inviting the speaker to confirm, correct, or develop it in whatever direction is true for them. When this kind of question lands accurately, it produces a specific and powerful experience. The experience of being known. Of having someone else see something about your experience that you yourself had not quite been able to articulate. Of being understood at a deeper level than your own words managed to capture. This experience is transformative in the specific way that genuine understanding is transformative. It does not just make the person feel better. It helps them understand themselves more fully. It activates the self-reflection systems we discussed in the neuroscience chapter in ways that produce genuine self-knowledge alongside the felt sense of being received. The acknowledgement that validates without evaluating. One of the most important linguistic skills in understanding-centered conversation is the ability to validate the speaker's experience without evaluating it. Validation, in this context, does not mean agreeing that everything the speaker says is accurate or that every interpretation they offer is correct. It means communicating that their experience, whatever it is, makes sense. That having the feeling they are having, given the situation they are in and the history they bring to it, is understandable. That there is nothing wrong with them for experiencing things the way they are experiencing them. This validation is distinct from agreement or endorsement. You can validate someone's anger about a situation while having your own view that the anger is somewhat disproportionate. You can validate someone's fear about a decision while believing that the decision is probably the right one. Validation is about the experience, not the interpretation. The language of validation sounds like, "That makes complete sense. Of course you feel that way. I completely understand why that would land the way it did. Given everything you've been through with this, it makes perfect sense that this is hard." Notice that none of these statements evaluate whether the speaker's experience is the most accurate or most useful response to their situation. They simply confirm that the experience is understandable, that there is nothing pathological or excessive or unreasonable about having it. This validation is often profoundly relieving to the speaker. Because many people carry their difficult experiences alongside a layer of self-judgment about having them. A sense that they should not feel this way. That they are being unreasonable or oversensitive or insufficiently resilient. That a better person would handle this differently. The validation that acknowledges the experience as understandable removes this layer of self-judgment. It allows the speaker to simply have the experience without also having to defend or justify having it. And this permission to simply have the experience often allows them to feel it more fully and therefore more quickly, to process and integrate it rather than defending it against the self-criticism that was interrupting the natural movement through it. The silence that holds. One of the most powerful linguistic tools available in understanding centered conversation is not a word at all. It is silence. Specifically, the quality of silence that communicates continued, active, genuinely present attention. The silence that is not the absence of engagement but a particularly full form of it. The silence that says, I am here, with you, in this, and I am giving you the space to find your way to what needs to be said next. Most people are uncomfortable with silence in conversation. The social conditioning around conversation treats silence as a gap that needs to be filled. As evidence that the conversation has stalled, that the exchange has dried up, that something has gone wrong. But in understanding centered conversation, silence is often the most productive thing that can happen. Because it is in the silence that the speaker has the space to access the next layer. To move from the accessible, comfortable parts of their experience into the territory that carries the most weight. To find the words for the thing that needs to be said but that does not quite have language yet. The attuned listener learns to hold silence with the quality of active, present attention rather than the quality of uncomfortable waiting. Their silence communicates that there is no urgency, no need to fill the space, no expectation that the speaker needs to perform for the listener's benefit. That the speaker is welcome to take whatever time they need to find their way to the next true thing. This quality of held silence is one of the rarest and most powerful gifts available in human conversation. It is the silence that feels like an embrace rather than an absence. That creates space rather than emptying it. Developing comfort with this silence, learning to hold it with the quality of genuine presence rather than the anxiety of waiting for it to end, is one of the most important practices in the development of understanding-centered conversation. Chapter 7. The Specific Practices, a complete guide to making people feel understood, 2 hours 18 minutes and 0 seconds to 2 hours 48 minutes and 0 seconds. We have covered the foundation of genuine presence, the skills of attuned listening, and the language of understanding. Now let us integrate all of these into a specific, practical guide that can be applied immediately in the conversations that matter to you. Practice 1. The pre-conversation preparation. Before entering a significant conversation, take 30 seconds to prepare yourself internally. Notice what you are currently carrying. The thoughts, concerns, emotional residue that might compete for your attention during the conversation. Acknowledge these briefly. You can return to them after. Then consciously set your intention for the conversation. Not to provide advice, or to help, or to say the right things. To genuinely understand what the other person is experiencing. This brief preparation does two things. It acknowledges your own internal state sufficiently that it needs less unconscious processing during the conversation. And it sets a conscious intention that will shape the quality of your attention throughout the exchange. Practice 2. The physical grounding. The quality of physical presence in conversation is not separate from the quality of attentional presence. They are interconnected. When your body is unsettled, distracted, or in a posture that does not support genuine engagement, your attention reflects this. Before and during significant conversations, attend to your physical presence. Settle your body. Soften any unnecessary tension in your face and shoulders. Orient your body toward the speaker in a way that communicates complete attention without the performance of it. Put down whatever you are holding. Remove whatever is dividing your visual attention. Create, physically, the conditions of undivided presence. This physical grounding is both a signal to the speaker that they have your full attention and a genuine support for the attentional quality that full attention requires. Practice 3. The first 2 minutes. The first 2 minutes of a significant conversation are the most important. They establish the relational template for everything that follows. They communicate, in the most immediate and the most powerful way, whether this conversation is going to be genuinely understanding-centered or whether it is going to follow the familiar patterns of most conversations. In the first 2 minutes, do not say anything that would direct the conversation toward your own perspective. Do not offer an interpretation. Do not provide reassurance. Do not ask a question that narrows the territory rather than opening it. Simply receive. Create space. Communicate through the quality of your attention that you are genuinely here for whatever they need to bring. The specific language of the first 2 minutes, when you do speak, is open and spacious. Tell me what's going on. I'm here. What's happening for you? Take all the time you need. These are not complex formulations. They are simple communications of availability and genuine interest. And they set a tone for the conversation that the speaker will feel immediately. Practice 4. The trailing questions. A trailing question is a question that follows the emotional trail of what was just said rather than redirecting the conversation toward new content. When the speaker says something that carries obvious emotional weight, the trailing question stays in that weight rather than moving past it. Speaker. And that's when I realized that nobody had even noticed. Most responses. That must have been really tough. So what did you do next? Trailing question. Nobody had even noticed. What was that moment like? When you realized that? The trailing question communicates that the listener heard the emotional significance of that moment. That they are not going to move past it until it has been genuinely explored. That the speaker's inner experience of that moment matters more than the narrative momentum of what happened next. Trailing questions are the primary conversational tool for the exploration of depth rather than breadth. They keep the conversation in the territory of genuine experience rather than allowing it to move too quickly through content. Practice 5. The tentative naming. The tentative naming is the specific practice of offering a name for something that seems to be present in the speaker's experience but that has not been explicitly stated. It sounds like this. I wonder if what's underneath some of this is tentative name for the unnamed experience. Something like feeling invisible, maybe. Is that close? The tentative quality is essential. You are not declaring what the speaker is feeling. You are offering a possibility and inviting them to confirm or correct it. When the naming is accurate, the effect is often immediate and visible. The speaker stops. Their body relaxes slightly. They say, yes, or, exactly, or, that's it, with a quality of relief that communicates that something has been found. When the naming is not quite right, the speaker will say so. And the attuned listener receives the correction with genuine curiosity, allowing the speaker's correction to guide them toward a more accurate formulation. The tentative naming is the most direct expression of the attuned listener's attempt to genuinely understand rather than simply acknowledge. It demonstrates that they have been attending not just to what was said but to what lies beneath it. And this demonstration is one of the most powerful producers of the felt sense of being deeply understood. Practice 6. The check-in. Periodically during significant conversations, the attuned listener checks in with the speaker about what they are experiencing in the conversation and what they need from it. This sounds like, is this useful? Is this what you need right now, to talk through what's going on? Or is there something different that would be more helpful? This check-in does several things. It gives the speaker agency over the direction and the purpose of the conversation. It communicates that the listener is genuinely interested in meeting the speaker's actual needs rather than following a conversational script. And it prevents the conversation from moving in directions that are more comfortable for the listener than they are useful for the speaker. The check-in also models a specific quality of relationship between the two parties. It communicates that this is a conversation about the speaker's experience and needs, not about the listener's performance. That the listener is genuinely oriented toward the speaker's benefit rather than toward their own sense of having done the right things. Practice 7. The closing. How an understanding-centered conversation ends matters as much as how it begins. The closing of a significant conversation should not be abrupt. It should acknowledge the sharing that occurred, the trust it represented, the value of the exchange. Thank you for sharing all of that with me. I think I understand more than I did before, and I want you to know that I take all of it seriously. This closing does something important. It acknowledges that something real happened in the conversation, that genuine sharing occurred and genuine reception was offered, and it communicates that the understanding that was produced is not a transient artifact of the conversation but something that will persist in the listener's relationship to the speaker. This persistence matters to the speaker, because feeling understood is not just a momentary experience. It is the beginning of a felt sense of being genuinely known. And knowing that the understanding will continue, that the other person carries it with them as a permanent update to their understanding of who you are, is part of what makes the experience of being understood feel genuinely valuable rather than merely pleasant. Chapter 8. Understanding across different contexts, applying the practices where they matter most. The practices we have developed apply across all relationship types and all conversational contexts. But they manifest differently in different situations. And understanding those differences makes the practices more immediately applicable to the specific relationships and contexts in which you most need them. In romantic partnership. In romantic partnership, the capacity to make your partner feel deeply understood is the single most important relational skill available to you. More important than conflict resolution, more important than communication technique, more important than any of the specific practices that relationship advice typically focuses on. Because feeling genuinely understood by your partner is the foundational experience from which everything else in the relationship flows. When it is present, the inevitable difficulties of shared life are navigated from a position of felt safety and genuine alliance. When it is absent, even the smallest difficulties can feel like evidence of fundamental incompatibility. The specific challenge of understanding in romantic partnership is the way that familiarity works against presence. The more deeply you know someone, the more your understanding of them is mediated by the picture you have formed over years of shared experience. And this picture, however accurate in its broad outlines, inevitably misses the specific, current, still developing dimensions of who they are right now. The understanding-centered practices in romantic partnership require the specific quality of beginner's mind toward your partner. The willingness to approach them, in each significant conversation, as if you do not already know what they are going to say. As if their experience of this specific situation, in this specific moment, might contain something genuinely new that your established understanding does not yet include. This is harder than it sounds. Because the established understanding provides a comfortable and efficient interpretive shortcut. It tells you, before your partner has finished speaking, what they probably mean and what you probably think about it. And the efficiency of this shortcut comes at the price of the genuine curiosity that makes them feel known rather than merely familiar. The specific practices most important in romantic partnership are the trailing question, which keeps the conversation in the speaker's actual experience rather than the listener's interpretation of it, and the tentative naming, which communicates the quality of genuine attention that sees beyond the words to the experience beneath. Perhaps most importantly, in romantic partnership, the frequency of understanding-centered conversation matters enormously. Not every exchange needs to be deep and exploratory, but the regular, consistent practice of genuine understanding orientation, the ongoing investment in keeping the picture current, in remaining genuinely curious about who your partner is right now and what they are experiencing right now, is what keeps the relationship alive and genuinely intimate over the long term. In friendship. In close friendship, the understanding-centered practices have a specific and profound application that is often underutilized. Because friendship is the relationship that most operates on the assumption of mutual understanding without the practices that actually produce it. The long-standing friendship in particular is characterized by an established picture of the friend that may not have been genuinely updated in years. By the comfortable assumption that you know this person, that you understand how they experience things, that the long history of the relationship provides sufficient basis for genuine knowing. This assumption is the primary obstacle to genuine understanding in long-term friendship. And the understanding-centered practices are the specific antidote to it. The first conversation practice, which we explored in the previous audiobook in this series, is particularly relevant in close friendship. The genuine, curious exploration of who this person has become, beyond the established picture, is often the most revitalizing thing that can happen in a friendship that has settled into comfortable familiarity. The specific application of understanding-centered practices in friendship involves the willingness to treat even familiar territory as genuinely exploratory. To ask, with genuine curiosity, about experiences and perspectives and feelings that you assume you already understand. To discover, through this renewed curiosity, that the person you have known for years is still capable of genuine surprise. Still becoming. Still containing dimensions that the comfortable picture has not included. In professional contexts. The understanding-centered practices apply in professional contexts with significant and often underestimated impact. The manager who makes their team members feel genuinely understood produces specific and measurable outcomes. Higher engagement, greater psychological safety, more creative risk-taking, stronger commitment to shared goals. Not because understanding is a management technique, but because the felt sense of being genuinely known by someone in a position of authority is one of the most powerful experiences of being valued as a full person rather than a functional resource. The specific challenge in professional contexts is the social norm of emotional restraint. The implicit expectation that professional relationships are primarily about task and function rather than about genuine knowing of the people involved. Understanding-centered listening in professional contexts does not violate this norm. It operates within it while expanding it slightly toward genuine human recognition. It is not the application of therapy-style deep questioning to a work conversation. It is the specific quality of genuine attention to what the other person is actually experiencing, what is actually important to them, what they most need to feel heard about, that communicates recognition of them as a full person within the professional relationship. This quality of recognition, when it is genuinely provided rather than performed, produces the specific experience of psychological safety that is the single strongest predictor of team performance identified in research by Google's Project Aristotle. In professional contexts, the specific practices most relevant are the accurate reflection, which communicates genuine comprehension of what has been shared, the tentative naming, which demonstrates that the listener has registered something beneath the explicit content, and the check-in, which gives the other person agency over what the conversation needs to provide. In difficult and charged conversations, the understanding-centered practices are most challenging and most important in conversations where emotions are highest. In conflict, in the aftermath of significant difficulty or hurt, in conversations where one or both parties are in a state of emotional activation that makes the quality of presence the practices require genuinely difficult to maintain. The specific challenge in charged conversations is that the very state that makes the understanding-centered practices most necessary, the emotional activation that produces the threat response and the defensive orientation, is precisely the state in which the practices are hardest to access. This is why the physiological grounding practice is most important in charged conversations. The deliberate, conscious management of your own nervous system state before and during the conversation. The specific practices of slow breathing, of deliberate physical settling, of the conscious acknowledgement and setting aside of your own reactivity, that create the conditions for genuine presence even in the most charged relational environment. In charged conversations, the specific understanding-centered practice of most value is the suspension of evaluation. The deliberate choice to receive what is being shared before forming any assessment of its accuracy or its fairness or its proportionality. Because the evaluation, in charged conversations, is the primary engine of escalation. And the suspension of evaluation, however brief, creates the space for the other person's experience to be genuinely received rather than contested. This is not capitulation. It is the specific attentional choice that makes genuine understanding possible even when you disagree. Even when what is being said is partially or significantly inaccurate from your perspective. Even when the emotional temperature of the conversation makes genuine receptivity difficult. The attuned listener in a charged conversation says to themselves, "Before I respond to whether what they are saying is right or fair, I am going to genuinely understand what they are experiencing and why they are experiencing it." And from that position of genuine understanding, whatever response I offer will be more effective than anything I could say from the position of defensive contest. Chapter 9. Common Obstacles and How to Navigate Them. Developing the capacity for understanding-centered conversation involves navigating specific obstacles that arise predictably in the practice. Knowing these obstacles in advance makes them easier to recognize when they arise and easier to address without losing the quality of presence the practice requires. Obstacle 1. The triggered listener. Sometimes what the speaker shares activates a strong personal reaction in the listener. Something that connects to a wound, a fear, a significant personal experience of the listener's own. And this activation makes the quality of presence the practice requires genuinely difficult to maintain. The listener suddenly finds themselves processing their own experience alongside the speaker's. The speaker's words land differently than they would without the activation. The listener's internal state shifts, sometimes dramatically, in response to something that, from the outside, might not appear particularly significant. When this happens, the first step is honesty with yourself about the activation. Acknowledge it internally. Notice, something they said has activated something in me. I am feeling something that belongs to my own history rather than to their experience. And that activation is currently competing for my attention. The second step is the brief, internal process of setting the activated material in the background. Not suppressing it, not denying it, acknowledging it and choosing to return to it later, after this conversation, so that it does not take the quality of your attention from the speaker during the exchange. Sometimes the activation is too strong to successfully background in this way. When that happens, honesty with the speaker about what is happening is the most understanding-oriented response available. What you're sharing is really important and I want to be fully present for it. I'm noticing something coming up for me that I don't want to let get in the way. Can you give me just a moment? This kind of transparency, offered briefly and genuinely, communicates something important. That the speaker's experience matters enough that the listener is actively managing their own internal state in order to be genuinely present for it. That the speaker is not alone with their experience even in this moment of the listener's temporary difficulty with presence. Obstacle 2. The need to help. When someone shares a difficulty, the urge to help is often overwhelming. Particularly in relationships where one's identity includes being a capable, helpful, problem-solving person. This urge to help is not wrong. It comes from genuine care. And helping is often genuinely valuable. But the specific form of helping that understanding-centered conversation offers is the help of genuine reception. Of being genuinely received in the experience rather than immediately guided out of it. The understanding-centered listener learns to recognize the helping impulse as it arises. To note, I want to fix this. And to inquire, internally, whether fixing is what is most needed right now, or whether being genuinely present with the experience is more valuable in this moment. A specific practice for managing the helping impulse is the explicit check-in. I find myself wanting to offer some thoughts about what you might do. But before I do that, is that actually what would be most helpful? Or is it more useful for me just to keep listening? This check-in is itself a form of understanding-centered response. It demonstrates that the listener is genuinely oriented toward the speaker's needs rather than their own impulse to be useful. And it gives the speaker the agency to direct the conversation toward what they actually need rather than what the listener is most comfortable providing. Obstacle 3. The long relationship assumptions. In long-standing relationships, One of the most persistent obstacles to genuine understanding-centered conversation is the assumption that you already understand. That the years of shared experience and established mutual knowledge mean that you know what this person feels, what they mean, and what they need. This assumption is the specific form of the familiarity trap that long relationships fall into. And it is, paradoxically, most dangerous in the most intimate relationships. Because the longer the relationship, the more established the picture, and the more the picture can substitute for the genuine receptivity that the current moment requires. The specific practice for navigating this obstacle is the deliberate adoption of beginner's mind. The conscious choice to approach the person you have known longest with the specific quality of curiosity that you would bring to someone you were meeting for the first time. To ask the questions you think you already know the answers to. To listen to the answers as if they might surprise you. Because they might. People are not static, and the person you have been in relationship with for decades has continued to develop in ways that your established picture may not accurately reflect. The beginner's mind practice is the specific attentional choice that keeps the relationship current with the actual, living, still developing person rather than the historical model of them. Obstacle 4. The discomfort with emotionally charged material. Some people find it genuinely difficult to remain present with highly emotionally charged material. With intense grief or rage or fear or despair. The discomfort of witnessing strong emotion without the impulse to reduce it is real and it is understandable. But the impulse to reduce, to reassure, to redirect away from the emotional intensity, is precisely what prevents the speaker from feeling genuinely understood in the moments when feeling understood matters most. The development of emotional tolerance, the capacity to remain present with intense emotion without the impulse to resolve it, is one of the most important practices in the development of understanding-centered conversation. A specific approach to this development is the somatic grounding practice during charged emotional content. When you feel the discomfort of witnessing intense emotion, you deliberately attend to the physical sensations in your own body. You breathe slowly and steadily. You maintain the quality of physical grounding that supports attentional presence. You treat your own discomfort as a somatic signal of the emotional weight of what is being shared, information to be received rather than a distress to be resolved. Over time, with practice, the emotional tolerance develops. The discomfort does not disappear, but it becomes more navigable, more something that can be present alongside continued attentional presence rather than something that forces the attention away from the speaker toward the management of your own discomfort. Chapter 10. The Long Game, Becoming Someone Who Makes People Feel Understood. We have covered the foundation of genuine presence, the skills of attuned listening, the language of understanding, the specific practices, the application across different contexts, and the navigation of common obstacles. Now we need to talk about something that is both simpler and more important than any of these individual elements. The kind of person you are becoming through this practice. Because making people feel deeply understood without saying much is not ultimately a skill. It is not a technique. It is not a set of practices that you apply strategically in the conversations where they seem most relevant. It is a way of being with other people. A fundamental orientation toward the inner world of the person you are with that becomes, through sustained practice and genuine commitment, the default quality of your presence in human interaction. This transformation happens gradually. It does not occur through a single significant insight or a dramatic decision to show up differently. It occurs through the daily, repeated practice of choosing genuine presence over comfortable distraction. Of choosing attuned reception over the performance of it. Of choosing to make the inner world of the other person the genuine primary object of your attention, conversation after conversation, in the ordinary moments of your ordinary relationships. And as this practice accumulates, something changes in how people experience you. Not because you say different things. Not because you have deployed different techniques. But because the quality of your attention, the genuine, full, attuned orientation toward their experience, becomes something they can feel consistently in your presence. You become someone they want to talk to. Not because you give good advice. Because in your presence they feel genuinely received. They feel more themselves. They understand themselves more clearly. They leave the conversation having accessed something about their own experience that they could not reach before the conversation began. This is the most profound thing that the practice of understanding centered presence produces. Not improved relationships, though it does produce those. Not greater influence, though it produces that too. Not a reputation for wisdom or caring, though both follow. It produces the specific quality of human connection that is the rarest and most valuable thing available in relationship. The experience of being genuinely, fully, accurately known by another person who meets that knowing with genuine care. This experience, multiplied across the relationships in your life, changes everything. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the quiet, compound, deeply significant way that the most important things change. People feel safer with you. More willing to bring you the full complexity of their experience. More willing to be vulnerable in your presence. More invested in the relationship as a source of genuine sustenance rather than merely pleasant company. And you feel something different too. Because the practice of genuine presence with other people is not a one-directional gift. It changes the person who practices it as much as the people who receive it. When you are genuinely present with another person's experience, when you allow their inner world to matter to you in the full and specific way that attuned presence requires, you are engaged in the most fundamental act of human recognition available. You are saying, through the quality of your attention, your experience is real. Your inner world matters. You are worth the full gift of my genuine presence. And in making this statement, in living it through the quality of your attention rather than just declaring it through the content of your words, you become someone whose own inner world is more fully alive. More genuinely connected to the people around you. More present to your own experience because you have developed the practice of genuine presence itself. This is the deepest gift of the practice we have been exploring throughout this audiobook. Not what it produces in others. What it produces in you. The person who makes people feel deeply understood without saying much is not just more effective in their relationships. They are more fully human in them. More genuinely alive to the profound privilege of genuine connection. More present to the specific, irreplaceable, still becoming person in front of them. And that presence, that genuine, full, attuned, understanding-oriented presence, is the most important thing any of us can bring to the people we love. There is someone in your life who needs to feel understood today. Not tomorrow. Not after you have perfected the practices. Not once you have had the significant insight that makes the whole thing click into place. Today, in the next conversation you have with them. They are carrying something. Everyone is always carrying something. The specific weight of their particular life, their particular challenges, their particular fears and hopes and confusions and griefs. And they are carrying it with varying degrees of support and varying degrees of the experience that most fundamentally lightens any load. The experience of being genuinely known. You know now what that experience is. At the neurological level, the physiological level, the deep evolutionary level of the social brain that has always required genuine attunement as a prerequisite for its fullest functioning. You know what produces it. Not what is said. The quality of attention that precedes and surrounds what is said. The genuine, full, attuned presence that communicates, in every signal of the listening body and every quality of the listening attention, that this person, and their inner world, and their specific experience of this specific moment, matters completely. You know the specific practices. The pre-conversation preparation. The physical grounding. The attuned listening skills. The trailing questions that stay in the speaker's experience. The tentative naming that reaches beneath the words. The silence that holds. The accurate reflection that captures the emotional texture. The validation that acknowledges without evaluating. The check-in that gives agency. The closing that honors. You know the obstacles. The autobiographical response. The evaluation habit. The solution imperative. The reassurance reflex. The performance of listening. And you know how to recognize them when they arise and redirect attention back to the genuine orientation that understanding requires. You know the long game. That this is not a skill but a way of being. That it develops through the daily practice of choosing genuine presence over comfortable distraction. And that the person who commits to this practice becomes, over time, someone whose presence is experienced as profoundly valuable by everyone they are genuinely present with. And you know the why. The deepest, most important why. That making people feel deeply understood is not a kindness or a social grace. It is the most fundamental act of human recognition available. The specific, irreplaceable experience that the social brain requires for its fullest functioning. The gift that, when it is given genuinely and consistently, changes the health and the quality and the fundamental aliveness of every relationship it touches. The conversation you have today could be that gift. Not because you say the perfectly attuned thing. Not because you flawlessly execute every practice you have learned in this audiobook. But because you choose, in the next conversation that matters, to make the inner world of the person you are with the genuine primary object of your attention. To show up for them in the most complete way that human presence can show up. To make them feel, in the specific and irreplaceable way that genuine understanding produces, that they are not alone with what they carry. That they are seen. That they matter. That you are here, genuinely, fully, without reservation, present with them. That is the practice. That is the art. That is the most important thing you will ever develop in your capacity as a human being in relationship with other human beings. It does not require much. It requires everything. Begin.